If you think you're shit hot and your shit doesn't stink, go jump in someone else's program. Go play in their pool. Let me know how you do. And I'll tell you what, I can take you guys and any power athlete person follows that program and drop in any other program. I guarantee you they're going to thrive. They're not going to be specialized in the things that other people are really good at, but you can move well. And I'm not talking about, one rep maxes. I'm talking about like, well, I'm going to drop you into this sport. I'm dropping in this sport. I'm dropping into this training program and this training program. And what you'll see is, if you do someone's program that's a really good program, you should be able to go to Pilates or yoga and slay that shit. You should be able to jump on a bike or play pickup tag or hike with a big pack on or knock down a door. I mean, whatever's important to you, it should transfer. And that really, I think, is the hallmark of what I'm thinking about now is where is the transferability? How do we know it transfers? Show me your work and show me your proof of your work, because I think that's the problem, right? Like the foot turned out debate, which is like what I love to call a zombie thirst trap. One, it's a zombie argument. Everyone is unique and special. Two, I haven't had any comments or started any internet fights for a while. So let me go ahead and just resurrect one of these zombie arguments to get likes. So that's a thirst trap. So there you go, zombie thirst trap. But, I'm like, look, absolutely. If you're defining fitness as doing more work or going up and down fast, right, or looking good naked, do whatever the heck you want. I'll come back to Franz Bosch. There's more variation in waltzing than there is in sprinting, which means at low speed, low intensities, low power, low pounds, you can get away with murder.
Sure.
And then as soon as you start to turn up the dial on transferability, speed, power, wattage, whatever you care about, you'll see that there's very little variation in how people move. How they train, completely different. And that's the thing we can argue about. Do you bench 3 times a week? Do you bench 2 times? I don't know. I mean, that's up to between you and your coach, right? And then simultaneously, how well does this thing apply? What's the transferability of these skills? And I think that is this sort of glaring hole that I see in people's understanding of, strength conditioning. And it's okay to have things you like to do. It's totally okay to have a style of training that resonates with you and motivates you and binds you together. But that's not the same thing as saying that your program has the most transferability. And for me, a lot of stuff drops to the side as soon as I'm saying how transferable is it?
Well, I mean, are they even thinking that next step? I mean, People are just trying to create some flash, to create some form of allure so they can bring people in and, hopefully get clients. Like they're not talking about years ago, as you remember, the phrase, "What are you training for?" was always my classic question. Whenever people would ask me, and remember, they come over to us with all these training programs and ideas, and I'm like, great, what's the intended outcome? If we can start with the outcome on where you want to go, if your job is I want to go to the Olympics and I want to do this, great, then we work backwards and you use, specific adaptation to impose demands, and we work backwards and we create something that allows you to at least make an assault on what your goal is. And all too often, whenever we ask people, I'm like, great, okay, I'm hearing all this, but what's the intended outcome? How are you using this to further your people for whatever their goals are? And at that point, it just becomes crickets because there is no forethought. There's no end state, end game, and then a work backwards. I mean, think about, everything within the mobility in this. I mean, like we got super geeked, as I know you did, into figuring out that a lot of problems that people are running into just comes from weak feet. And hurting people's feelings and being like, maybe if you did some stuff to focus on your foot health, focus on strengthening. Because remember, everybody got stuck in this like collapsing knees and glutes and this and this. And it's like, at the end of the day, fucking weak feet, fix your fucking feet. And now all of a sudden, every time I click on Instagram, there's some new Instagram dedicated towards the foot. And I was like, fuck, man, like 20 years ago, we've been talking about this. Now all of a sudden it's become, I'm like, what's next? And all these stupid things that people are doing to try to strengthen their feet, which are fine. I'm sure they all work. But at the end of the day, they're not actually addressing the underlying issue, which is nobody's doing anything ballistic and they're not sprinting. They're not running up hills. They're never putting their foot in a position. So they're trying to do all this band and all this mobility and all this shit. And I'm like, but they're never putting their foot in the position that truly stresses it, which is to put your foot in the ground and go 100 fucking miles an hour.
100%. 100%. I think, again, difficult to always make your case. I wish I could go back and be clearer. The reason we mobilized was to improve your position and restore your position so you could go work.
Sure.
And there were sort of two models to improving your position. You could do a lot of skill transfer exercises or corrective exercises, right? Which are tempo or isometric based positions. That's what a corrective exercise is. You're trying to remind someone how to move. But what I saw a lot of was, well, if I have a really good strength conditioning program, I don't need a lot of corrective exercises. You know, even my accessory work can be corrective exercises, right? But what we realized is that, you know, people couldn't get into some of these basic shapes. I'm like, look, you don't have any shoulder extension. What do you think is going to happen when you bench? Like, you're going to suck because you don't have any shoulder extension. So why don't we fix that? And then you can bench, and then it corrects itself, right? And then you layer in the technique, which expresses the best physiology. And then you have a really nice recursive model, right? I'm whatever sport I'm doing or lifestyle I'm living, if I don't have access to this position, then I can quickly fix or improve this position, and then go train that position.
But you have to train the position once you mobilize to it to ingrain the pattern. And so where we got fucking wrapped around the axle is that people were they were basically over mobilizing and not actually using it in a meaningful way. I'm like, hey, if we work on all the shoulder mobility and then you don't go do anything to ingrain it, or, you know, we're working on the hips or whatever it is, and you don't go squat and do something that actually uses it in a meaningful range of motion, then there's no way to crystallize it and use it. It's just basically fucking jerking off, you know, twice a day, you know, mobilizing yourself, when I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, we talked about this with the Rolfing, and also the, we've had so many conversations on this with the yoga people, where they were so flexible and passive range of motion, but the minute we put them under load, they had no range of motion to actively load any of this stuff.
Well, that's why, you know, one is you're 100% right. And two, the goal always is to create a more durable, functioning person, right? Again, so how are you measuring what you're doing? And, you know, I think you really bring it up that, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, if we even took a step back and we're like, well, what are we really doing? Well, here's position. Here's what I think every human being should be able to do. And if you're a hyper specialized athlete, you know, going to the Olympics, we're still going to work on improving your positions, but there are some positions during sports specific training that we don't have to worry about as much. We keep an eye on minimums. But if it's a sport-specific training, the only goal is to improve your sport. Then we have general physical preparedness training, or you could call it, you know, general adaptation training or general preparation, right? It's not necessarily GPP. It's sort of a step up where we're off season. We can begin to reclaim some of our positions and shapes. But what we really need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on is, do I have the range of motion to be able to do what a normal human being should do? Can I control that range of motion? And so that was the definition of mobility. Do I have the raw range of motion? Do I have the tissues that allow me to put my arms over my head? And then do I have control over that? And then suddenly, you know, if you peeled back a layer and said, well, look at, you know, what is it? Okay, here's a position I value. Well, how can I challenge that position? Well, what we've traditionally done is challenge it with load. Just make it heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier until your position falters, right? Well, that doesn't really look like sport. One of the things you brought up is that ballistic, i.e. speed. Can I do this fast? And we see a lot of people, I see a lot of isometrics, a lot of things on the internet where people are training. And then as soon as someone tries to do something fast, their mechanics fall apart. And so one of the easiest ways to see whether or not you own a position is to add speed to that position, right? Suddenly I'm like, oh, your pressing looks good. Now push press. Oh, elbow flare, back noodle. Okay, now we understand that you don't understand that position. Now do that when your heart rate's a little bit high, right? You know, one of my friends invented CrossFit. Early on, he would go run and deadlift. Do you remember that, John? I mean, I think you were doing that in NFL a long time ago, right?
Yeah. No, no, we would actually, I never pulled a deadlift off the ground my entire NFL career. I only RDL'd, and then we would rest, and then we would go out and try to sprint as fast as we could.
Weird. Yeah, and what you see is you're challenging position with fatigue. You're challenging position, but you still have parameters. Not, hey, like as soon as speed comes down or we've lost our technique, we're done. And versus, here's the amount of, you know, hey, you're going to bail for the next, 20 minutes, continue to move these piles of rocks, right? There's no demand. And so what we end up is less springy, less powerful. But then we can say, well, can you do this, under a little volume conditions? You can do this under a little, metabolic demand. Suddenly I'm like, hey, you're going to have to do more than 1 rep or 5 reps. You're going to, every once in a while, need to make sure you can swing that kettlebell 10 times or 20 times. But then I can say, well, can you handle it with a barbell, which is a closed torque system where I can create rotation off a fixed object. And then I also need to be able to do it with an open torque system where I have to create all the stability proximally because I'm handling a dumbbell or I'm swimming or I'm grabbing a kettlebell. Then you can add competition and you can just go on and closed chain, open chain. Am I pressing and compressing or am I distracting and pulling? And all of a sudden what you see is, oh, I can drop this model of understanding that my goal is to challenge the robustness of position, and the person I think who has the best command of shape, and I'm talking about full shape under as many different domains as possible. And again, you can tweak those domains as you need for your sport. That person is really competent and really durable. And now we have a way of understanding how good your program is.
So how's the knee feeling?
You know, it has been, I can't believe I waited this long. You know, I was taking things. So if you don't know, I just had my knee replaced in October. I was skiing 7 years ago. I love the internet. Everyone's like, see, mobility doesn't work. I'm like, yep,
oh,
doesn't
Jesus.
work. And you couldn't stretch that? I was like, nope, couldn't stretch it out.